The restaurant fell silent as the elderly man rose from his wheelchair, his weathered hand trembling as he brought it to his brow in a perfect military salute. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at the younger man, a stranger to him until moments ago, who stood frozen beside his daughter. 20 years I've waited to thank the man who saved my best friend in Fallujah, he said, his voice breaking. Never thought I'd meet him on the night my own daughter showed she didn't deserve him. If you've ever wondered whether karma is real, or if the universe has ways of humbling us exactly when we need it most, this story might just convince you. Before you continue watching, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that remind us of the unexpected connections that shape our lives. Melissa had always considered herself a catch. At 32, she had the career, the condo, and the confidence that came with never having faced real hardship. What she didn't have was patience for what she called baggage, her term for other people's life complications. When her friend Tara set her up on a blind date with James, she'd been told he was handsome, successful, and kind. What Tara had conveniently left out was that he was also a single father to a 7-year-old daughter. The evening had started pleasantly enough at Rossini's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. James arrived precisely on time, dressed in a well-fitted navy suit that complemented his broad shoulders and the subtle flecks of silver at his temples. His smile was genuine, his handshake firm, and Melissa found herself thinking that Tara might have finally gotten something right. "It's nice to meet you," James said, his voice carrying a warmth that immediately put Melissa at ease. "Tara's told me a lot about you." "All good things, I hope," Melissa replied with a practiced smile, taking her seat as the waiter pulled out her chair. "Of course. She mentioned you're a marketing director?" "That sounds fascinating." Melissa nodded, pleased at the opportunity to discuss her recent promotion. "I just led a campaign that increased our clients' engagement by 40%. The CEO actually called me personally too." James's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression shifting subtly. "I'm sorry, would you excuse me for just one moment?" Without waiting for her response, he stepped away from the table, phone pressed to his ear. Melissa sipped her water, irritation beginning to simmer. First dates were about making impressions, and taking calls wasn't making a good one. When James returned 5 minutes later, his apologetic smile did little to soothe her annoyance. "I'm really sorry about that. Where were we?" "I was telling you about my work," Melissa said coolly. "Is everything okay?" James hesitated. "Yes, everything's fine. That was just my daughter's babysitter checking in." The word daughter landed between them like an unexpected bill. Melissa's smile froze. "Your daughter? Tara didn't mention you had a child." "Emma. She's 7. James's eyes softened in a way that made Melissa's stomach tighten. "She's the center of my universe." "I see." Melissa took a long sip of her water, mind racing. A child meant complications, schedules built around school and activities, a home filled with toys and noise. It meant James came with attachments, responsibilities that would always take precedence over her. "Her mother isn't in the picture," James added, misreading her silence as curiosity rather than dismay. "It's been just Emma and me for the past 5 years." 5 years? Melissa couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "That's a long time to be managing alone." James shrugged. "You do what you have to do for the people you love." The waiter arrived with their drinks, providing Melissa a moment to recalibrate. She'd already decided this would be their only date, but there was no reason to make the evening uncomfortable. They could enjoy their meal, exchange pleasantries, and part ways with the mutual understanding that they weren't compatible. But then James's phone buzzed again. "I'm so sorry," he said, glancing at the screen. "It's the babysitter again. I should take this." This time, Melissa didn't bother hiding her irritation. She watched as James stepped away, speaking in low, urgent tones. When he returned, his expression was troubled. "Is everything all right?" Melissa asked, more out of social obligation than genuine concern. Emma's running a fever. The babysitter gave her some children's Tylenol, but if it gets any higher, I'll need to go home. James ran a hand through his hair. I'm really sorry about this. It's not how I wanted our evening to go. Something in Melissa snapped. Perhaps it was the accumulated disappointment of yet another date derailed, or the realization that James's life would always revolve around his daughter's needs. Whatever the cause, the filter between her thoughts and words dissolved. You know, this is exactly why I don't date single parents, she said, her voice sharp enough to draw glances from nearby tables. There's always some crisis, some reason why your child has to come first. Did it ever occur to you that maybe you shouldn't be dating at all if you can't even make it through dinner without interruptions? James stared at her, his expression shifting from surprise to something harder. Emma is running a fever of 101. She's 7 years old and scared. Of course she comes first. That's my point exactly, Melissa continued, warming to her grievance. You single dads always act like you deserve some special medal for doing what parents are supposed to do anyway. Taking care of your own kid isn't heroic, it's the bare minimum. She gave a short, dismissive laugh that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet space around their table. Honestly, it's a little pathetic how you use your devoted dad routine as your entire personality. What else do you even have to offer? The silence that followed her words was absolute. Melissa became aware that several nearby diners were staring, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. James's face had gone completely still, a muscle working in his jaw. Before he could respond, there was a commotion from a table near the back of the restaurant. An elderly man in a wheelchair was struggling to stand, waving off the concerned hands of the middle-aged woman beside him. Dad, please sit down, the woman urged. Your heart. But the old man was already on his feet, swaying slightly as he steadied himself against the table. He was tall despite his obvious frailty, with the ramrod posture of someone who had spent a lifetime standing at attention. Captain Reynolds, he called out, his voice carrying across the restaurant with surprising strength. Captain James Reynolds of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. James turned, confusion giving way to recognition as he looked at the elderly man. Colonel Harris? The old man brought his hand to his brow in a perfect military salute, tears streaming down his weathered face. 20 years I've waited to thank the man who saved my best friend in Fallujah, he said, his voice breaking. Never thought I'd meet him on the night my own daughter showed she didn't deserve him. The woman beside him, Melissa suddenly realized it was the restaurant's owner, Patricia Harris, looked mortified. Dad, please. No, Patricia. This man carried your Uncle Thomas 3 miles through enemy territory with a bullet in his own leg. Colonel Harris's eyes never left James. When the medevac couldn't land, he gave Thomas his own blood. Field transfusion, right there in the dirt. James shook his head. Sir, I was just doing my job. Your job, Colonel Harris repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Your job was to lead your men, not to die for them. But you were willing to. And now I hear you're raising a little girl on your own after losing your wife to cancer. Melissa felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. Cancer? James's wife had died of cancer. Emma's mother was the strongest person I've ever known, James said quietly. She fought for 3 years. When she knew she wasn't going to make it, she made me promise to make sure Emma would always feel safe and loved. That's all I'm trying to do. Colonel Harris nodded, tears still streaming down his face. And this young lady thinks that's the bare minimum? That it's pathetic? He turned his gaze to Melissa, and she had never felt smaller under anyone's scrutiny. My dear, do you have any idea what it takes to be both mother and father to a child while carrying the weight of your own grief? To put aside your pain every single day because a little person needs you to be strong? Patricia had come around the table, supporting her father as his strength began to wane. Dad, you need to sit down. In a moment, Patty. Colonel Harris kept his eyes on Melissa. "Young lady, I don't know what kind of life you've led that makes you think devotion is something to mock. But I hope someday you learn that the capacity to love selflessly isn't a weakness, it's the only kind of strength that matters in this world." With that, his knees buckled. James moved with surprising speed, catching the older man before he could fall and helping him back into his wheelchair. The colonel gripped James's hand. "My Thomas died last year," he said. "Complications from those old wounds. His last words were about you. He said, 'Tell that stubborn captain he was right. Living was worth the pain after all.'" James bowed his head, visibly moved. "He was a good man, sir. One of the best I've ever known. As are you, son." Colonel Harris squeezed James's hand once more before releasing it. "Now go home to your little girl. She needs her father." James straightened, nodding. He turned to Melissa, who sat frozen in her chair, shame burning her cheeks. "I think we're done here," he said quietly. "I'll take care of the bill on my way out." "James, Melissa began, but he was already walking away, stopping only to exchange a few quiet words with Patricia before heading for the door. The restaurant gradually returned to its normal hum of conversation, though Melissa could feel curious glances still directed her way. She sat alone, her untouched appetizer congealing on the plate before her. Patricia approached her table, her expression carefully neutral. "Can I get you anything else this evening?" Melissa shook her head, unable to meet the other woman's eyes. "Just the check, please." "It's been taken care of," Patricia said. Captain Reynolds insisted. Of course he had. Even after her cruelty, he'd shown consideration. The realization only deepened Melissa's shame. "I didn't know," she said softly. "About his wife. About any of it." Patricia's expression softened slightly. "Few people do. James doesn't talk about himself much. He's always been that way, according to my father." "Your father, he seems to know James well." "They've never actually met before tonight," Patricia said. "But my Uncle Thomas wrote to my father every week until he died. James featured in many of those letters." She paused. "My father has a heart condition. He shouldn't have stood up like that, but when he heard what you said." She shook her head. "Some things matter more than caution, I suppose." Melissa nodded, words failing her. Patricia seemed to take pity on her. "You know, James comes here every month with Emma. It's their special dinner date. She always orders spaghetti and meatballs, even though it's not on our menu. James called ahead the first time to ask if our chef could make it for her." Patricia smiled at the memory. "He brings her a new book each time. They read together while they wait for their food." The image was so at odds with Melissa's dismissive assessment of James that she felt physically ill. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because everyone deserves a chance to see themselves clearly," Patricia replied. "Even when the reflection isn't flattering." She straightened. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like. The table is yours for the evening." But Melissa couldn't bear to remain in the restaurant a moment longer. She gathered her purse and coat, hurrying out into the cool evening air. On the sidewalk, she paused, drawing deep breaths to steady herself. A text message lit up her phone, Tara, asking how the date was going. Melissa stared at the screen, unsure how to even begin explaining what had happened. How could she describe the moment she'd revealed the worst version of herself to a room full of strangers? How could she explain that she'd mocked a widowed war hero for prioritizing his motherless child? Instead of responding, she scrolled through her contacts until she found her father's number. They hadn't spoken in weeks, her busy schedule, she always told herself, though the truth was more complicated. Her father's new wife, his second family, the half-siblings who adored him, it was easier to keep her distance than to acknowledge the jealousy that gnawed at her. Her father answered on the third ring. "Melissa? Is everything okay? "Dad," she said, her voice breaking. "I did something terrible tonight." There was a pause, and then her father's voice, gentle in a way she hadn't allowed herself to remember. "Tell me what happened, sweetheart." And standing there on the sidewalk outside Rossini's, Melissa began to speak. She told him everything, the date, her reaction to learning about Emma, the cruel words she'd spoken, Colonel Harris's intervention. She spoke until her throat was raw, until the story was fully unspooled between them. When she finished, her father was quiet for a long moment. "That sounds like a difficult evening," he finally said. "Difficult?" Melissa gave a watery laugh. "Dad, I humiliated myself. Worse, I hurt someone who didn't deserve it." "Yes, you did," her father agreed, his honesty both painful and oddly comforting. "The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" "What can I do? James is never going to want to speak to me again." "Maybe not," her father conceded. "But this isn't just about James, is it? It's about why you reacted the way you did." Melissa closed her eyes, leaning against the cool brick of the building. "I don't know why I said those things. They just came out." "Melissa," her father said gently, "you've been angry with me for a long time for starting a new family after your mother and I divorced. You were 18 when Diane and I got married, old enough that I thought you'd be okay. But I never really asked, did I? I just assumed you'd adjust." The tears came then, hot and sudden. "You had 2 more kids," Melissa whispered. "And you were different with them. More present. More, everything." "I was younger," her father said. "And yes, I learned from the mistakes I made with you. I'm sorry for that, Melissa. I'm sorry you had to be the child I learned on." They were words she'd needed to hear for years, acknowledgement of a pain she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it wasn't a natural part of her. "I saw James take that call about his daughter, and I got so angry. Not at him, really. Just at the situation. At the evidence that some fathers prioritize their children above all else." "Yes," Melissa admitted, the truth of it sharp in her chest. "Which is horrible, because his situation is nothing like ours. His wife died. He didn't choose to leave. Pain doesn't always make those distinctions," her father said. "But Melissa, at some point, you have to decide whether you're going to let old hurts determine how you treat new people." It was a gentle rebuke, but a rebuke nonetheless. Melissa wiped at her tears. "I don't know how to fix this." "You start by acknowledging the harm you've caused," her father said. "And then you do better next time. That's all any of us can do." They talked for a while longer, making plans to meet for lunch the following weekend, with Diane and the kids, a first in many years. When they finally hung up, Melissa felt wrung out but somehow lighter. She opened her rideshare app, then paused. On impulse, she opened her browser instead and typed, "Captain James Reynolds Marine Corps Fallujah." Several results appeared, including a Military Times article with a faded photograph of a younger James, his arm around another Marine. The headline read, "Captain's Heroism Saves Squad in Ambush." Melissa read the article, then another, and another. By the time she finally called her ride, she had a clearer picture of the man she'd so casually dismissed. James Reynolds hadn't just saved Thomas Harris, he'd led a squad that had been pinned down for 18 hours, coordinating their defense and treating the wounded despite his own injuries. He'd received the Silver Star but had declined media interviews, insisting he'd only done what any of his men would have done in his position. 3 days later, Melissa stood outside the pediatric oncology ward of Children's Hospital, a gift bag clutched in her sweating hand. It had taken considerable effort to find James, a carefully worded message to Tara, an admission of her behavior, a plea for help making amends. "Tara.